Pat Duffy graduated from University College Galway with an honours degree in industrial engineering. He's the founder of the Alternative Business Board Midlands. Pat, tell the audience all about Pat Duffy.
Well, thank you, John. I mean, I'm a person who's travelled that journey that you're talking about, and I founded the Alternative Board Midlands 4 years ago. So where I'm in my 5th year doing business now. So it's established business. What I do is I help forward-thinking business owners to work with their businesses, their lives, and their visions and goals for what they want to achieve with their lives and their businesses. And I do that by leveraging peer boards of other business owners, by bringing to the table all the tools and methods that I have from the Alternative Board itself. And I have a bunch of proprietary services that I offer to business owners arising from that. And I run a couple of boards, which are peer boards, which run monthly, typically very intense 3-hour experience on a Zoom call at the moment, but it would otherwise be face-to-face. And I help people, each person there typically has a 23-minute time slot to process an issue, whichever issue arises in their business or in terms of where they want to go with their business. And I help them in terms of an annualized planning format as well for strategic planning in business.
What got you into, let's start again, going back to your days as a Leaving Cert student, you went to University College Galway. What made you decide to study industrial engineering?
I remember going for long walks with my mum, thrashing out what I was going to do. And a lot of my friends were doing civil engineering, and she wanted me to become a civil engineer. And my mum was a business owner of a very small but very effective and successful guest house business, which kept people from all over the world fishing and touring in the Midlands of Ireland. So I was a fishing guide as a kid, and I didn't want to become a civil engineer, even though I was very impressed with the profession. I wanted something different, and I wanted to have a different kind of career path. And I saw industrial engineering as a path to doing that, working more with computers, working more with industrial type applications, and working more with industry. So that interested me, and that's why I went that route. It wasn't a conscious choice to go to Galway rather than to go to Dublin, but the only course available to me was in Galway. I was very lucky. It was a very forward-thinking guy called Jimmy Brown, who was the key driving force behind the program at the time. And Jimmy went on to become the head of NUI Galway. And compared to all the other universities in Ireland, Jimmy drove NUI Galway forward. Many people would take issue with that, but he was a visionary in his time, and it was a very visionary program. I was very lucky to get on it. So I got a great background, and I walked straight into a job at the end of it with Ericsson.
Tell me all about your career in Ericsson.
Well, I joined Ericsson almost by accident. I was coming out, and I was genuinely convinced that in Ireland in 1985, there was very, very little employment opportunity, and I thought I was destined to emigrate to the UK with a lot of my friends of that generation. All my civil engineering friends had to go to the UK. There was, I think, 3 jobs to be had in Ireland out of all of my colleagues, and there were something like 60 in that class graduating that year. I, on the other hand, was doing industrial engineering, and there was a significant software component in that. And I pitched up in Athlone. I got myself a job in a company called Ericsson, and when I went home to my dad and I told him, "Dad, I've just got a job at Ericsson," he said, "Son, you could have worked with the Digital Equipment Corporation, you could have worked with Wang, you could have worked with IBM, you could have worked with Sperry. Who's Ericsson?" Right? Nobody knew what Ericsson was or who they were in 1985. The mobile phone hadn't even been invented at that stage. So it was a really fortuitous leap for me. And I had a 22-year career with Ericsson.
Of course, the very first mobile phones, from my memory, appeared in 1989. I remember when I was working in London, you'd see these people who were working in the city with these massive, big analog phones as they were at the time.
Yeah, I actually have one here. That's one.
So obviously,
that's an Ericsson hotline phone.
Okay.
So
there was people who were going around with imitation phones at the time. I remember it well. So did you realize at the time you were on at the beginning of something really massive called
Yes.
mobile technology. And did you ever see mobile technology advancing to the state it has today, which is maybe 30 odd years later?
Yeah, I was really, really lucky. I was just in the right place at the right time, and I got all the right jobs to really enjoy the benefits of it. So I was the guy in the room in Dublin with Mr. Noel Woods, God rest his soul. And Noel was saying to me, Pat, there's 15,000 mobile subscribers in Ireland right now. It's 1992. What do you think it's going to be next year? Will it be 30,000 or do you think it'll be 50,000? That was the conversation we were putting into the forecast with Ericsson to figure out how to grow it. Like now, everybody's a mobile phone in Ireland. There's probably 7 million mobile phones in Ireland. But at that time, it was really taking off. And that was before digital. Digital arrived in 93, 94, the GSM rollout started. And I went to Sweden in 94. And I started working in earnest with the mobile technologies in the 90s. And it really was fantastic. I got to work with Japanese mobile technology in Thailand, for example. I got to work with what we call the CDMA wars in Asia. Worked with the top guys in mobile there in terms of pushing back on a company called Qualcomm, which some people might have heard of. At that time, ultimately, the people we were fighting with, Ericsson bought that business. I actually sold their stuff in Asia, which very, very few people get to do. And I was very, very lucky to be in an interesting place through my career. I spent 7 years working for Ericsson in Asia as a business development guy, key account manager, services manager in various roles in Indonesia and in Thailand. So I had a really good run with Ericsson. I got to do some extraordinary stuff.
Looking back at your time with Ericsson, did you enjoy your work? And also, what contributed to you jumping off the mobile phone treadmill and looking for a new opportunity elsewhere?
I think probably I took a route that brought me back to what I'm doing now, starting when I was out in Indonesia, when I had a choice to go to another Asian country with my family. And we had a family meeting. I had two small girls at the time. They were only 8 and 9 years old, and my wife. And we said, right, we can go off to somewhere like the Philippines for another 3 years, or we can go back to Ireland. What do you want to do? And the kids said, we want to go back to Ireland. And it made sense to me because I didn't want my kids to go into secondary school cold without having had some chance to adapt by being in the primary school system. So we decided to terminate our international sojourn after having spent nearly 10 years abroad and come back to Ireland. And I tried not to work in Ericsson when I came back to Ireland, but I failed. I ended up working in Ericsson and Athlone for 3 years. But I didn't really fit because I was too much of a business developer and too much of a pushing the boundaries and stuff kind of guy anyway to fit into an R&D environment like Ericsson and Athlone. And after 3 years, I was over 40 and they offered packages to anybody over 40 who wanted them. So I was a candidate and I took my package and I went off and I started working with a company called CSG International, selling billing systems and working with delivery of billing systems, starting with the Meteor implementation in Dublin with Meteor's billing system, and then spending a lot of time in the Middle East, growing the Middle East business really from just a one guy in Dubai to 22 people in Dubai over a period of 4 years. So that was a lot of fun. I did that. That was my last big corporate gig. And we had a bad year in Dubai and they offered me another package and I took it. And that was my route back to Ireland. And I decided that I wasn't going to work for another multinational business. I was going to try and find work for myself. I was at that stage 50 and I considered myself to be unemployable unless I was actually gigging in a corporate environment. I just wanted to get away from large corporates. And this is when I got the opportunity to work with Tab and get a Tab franchise off the ground in the Midlands. So I took that. I wanted to work with small and medium-sized businesses, and I wanted to work with people who actually own their own businesses and make a living from doing that. That was a conscious decision on my part, and that's what I've been doing since.
What did you learn about yourself when you transitioned from working in a multinational environment to self-employment, setting up the Tab franchise in the Midlands?
I think what I learned about myself is I was much less well prepared than I thought I was. So I had a hell of a lot to learn. It was a humbling experience. I have to be very frank about that. There was a lot I did not know. I didn't have a good network. You really do need a good network in business to be established in business. You need to have a good set of numbers in your phones. You need to have people who trust you and understand you and are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and willing to work with you. It takes time to build that up from a cold start. And you need patience and perseverance if you're going to do what I did, come back from a lot of overseas work and start from scratch. You need to be very patient, and you need to work hard, cover the ground, and establish that trust in a large group of people so that you can build your business. Because the sort of thing that I do is really, trust is essential. People need to see it, they need to understand where you're coming from, they need to say, yeah, that makes sense to me, and you need to understand them before you can even begin to get that type of traction with people. And that takes long hours of conversations and a lot of learning both the business landscape and also learning the culture of business in Ireland from the bottom up, and being that part of that culture and being a credible integrated part of it. So my route to doing that involved quite a bit of networking, logically enough. So my networking platforms where I met you in Chamber in Naas, for example, and also BNI in Tullamore, which is a fantastic networking platform. Of the two, BNI in Tullamore was for me outstanding. It was really good. It was a very, very strong group of people, serious business people, serious group of guys doing good work as a BNI, fulfilling their mission in that. And I learned a lot from that group. And obviously, as my business grew, I learned an awful lot from my own customers. And I feel much more very comfortable in my skin now in terms of doing what I do and working with the people I work with. I'm very confident in terms of, the prescriptive side of what I do, which isn't very much. Most of what I do is asking questions. I don't give answers and I don't tell people what to do. It comes out in the conversations I take.
What's the biggest takeaway you've gained from networking at the Kildare Chamber of Commerce or going to BNI in Tullamore?
I suppose two things. One is just how much is out there. I'm always amazed at how much diversity and how much activity there is out there. The human brain doesn't really get its head around what's out there in terms of the numbers of businesses, the numbers of people actually doing the work, the scale of economic activity that exists in the country. Humans don't really understand it. You need a machine to really get a proper CRM and a proper system to really properly get your head around what's going on out there. There's also some really inspiring people, wonderful people, and that's big part of what keeps me going. Is listening to people talk about their challenges and their business and helping them through with that as they hit the various brick walls that we all hit now and again. It's amazing what people have done and what they've achieved. And I really, in a very positive way, and I've worked in great environments all over the world. I think the Irish business environment, the SME space, is an extremely positive and uplifting place to be for the most part. There's a great degree of optimism, get out there and get it done type of attitude. No standing on ceremony, certainly no frills, and certainly no airs and graces about business in Ireland. It's get out there and make it happen. And I like that. I really like that.
Great answer. Would you consider yourself a better person for having developed your listening skills since starting the Alternative Business Board franchise in the Midlands?
Yes, obviously. As you can probably guess, I can talk as well. But I guess to do what I do, really, the truth doesn't come out of my mouth. The truth comes out of the person I'm working with. And there's no point in me telling somebody what they need to do in their business. In my as a business coach, I have to have conversations with them, resulting in me at the end of that meeting simply writing, okay, what's your takeaways? And they'll tell me. And if I've done my job right, I'll have asked the right types of questions and I'll have walked them over the territory that they needed to be walked over. So that by the time they get to the end of that session, typically it's a 90-minute session, they're knocked back on their back feet by the questions. Say, right, what do you take away from this 90-minute session now? And I take out the pen and I really write this carefully down, because usually the truth comes out. And some of the ideas you might have tossed around, which I might think are great ideas, they don't come out at all because they weren't great ideas. The ideas that really are great are the ones that resonate with the person who owns the business and resonates with them. And they'll tell you. And usually most of what you cover, hopefully if you have a really good session, everything you cover comes out. Often some of what you cover comes out. Rarely nothing what you cover comes out. And what comes out in that latter part is usually the commitment in terms of where they're going and what they're going to do in the framework of a plan that's properly founded and properly created. And you need to listen to get them to that point. You won't get them to that point if you transmit 70% and receive 30%. You can only do that if it's the other way around. You've got to let them actually do the speaking in the meeting. Now, for some people that can be problematic because they go on, and some people just can't get in with even a question in some cases. But that's the challenge of the business coach, to manage all comers and to understand the vast variety of behavioral styles that people can present with, and to adapt my style so that it gives the best value for that individual regardless of their style. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sorry, I have a quick question there. Can you explain for the audience what the alternative board is and how does it function?
Well, the alternative board is actually a large group of people doing what I do all over the world. Right? So there's about 20 countries in the world where people do what I do. And you can't get to do what I do without, first of all, spending quite a lot of time being coached and schooled in the methods and tools that a business coach would follow within the alternative board program. There's a software platform called Business Builders Blueprint, which is a working environment which provides some access to some of the tools that we use. The most important skill, actually, that all of the people in the alternative board who work like I do have is that they are business coaches, and strategic business coaches in my case, meaning that we are comfortable having conversations at a strategic level, which could result in some concrete type consulting work. But generally, I would often say, right, you need a tax advisor here, or you need an IT specialist here, or you need somebody who's particularly skilled in a specific area here, maybe a lean consultant or something of that nature. A lot of the services that you need, I'm not looking to sell consultancy. A business coach is somebody who sits with the business owner and decides where they need to go with those types of needs. And that's essentially the role that the alternative board takes. It provides a guy with the mileage that somebody like I would have, with the experience and with the coaching skill set, so that a business owner can get that experience typically on a monthly basis, so that they get a reset and they get a steer and they get space dedicated to them where they genuinely get to do some strategic thinking and working on their business rather than in their business. And usually that means improved lives by having improved businesses. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's essentially.
Yes, indeed. Just going back to Pat Duffy for a few more minutes.
Sure.
Tell us about your proudest moment in your career to date.
I had a moment when I was in Indonesia, as I look back on it now, and I remember standing up in front of about 70 people, and they were my crew basically, and there was somebody from Ireland there as well, and she drew my attention to it. And I stood up and I made a statement in front of everybody. It was a Friday evening, on a Friday evening at 3 o'clock, we used to typically take a break and we'd do an update of what was going on in the business. I remember saying, look guys, I don't believe that there is any room in the world right now. It was 2003. There's no room in the world right now with 90 people in it who are doing more to bring mobile technology to people on the planet than we are. And I stand proudly to say that that was true. And the bit that kicks me now as I look back, nearly 20 years looking back on it, is actually I was in charge of that. We were rolling out telecommunications at a phenomenal rate in Indonesia at that period in time. AT&T Wireless Services was the only mobile operator who was building more mobile telecommunications technology. And they were doing it across the United States of America. And there was somebody who could probably make that claim, but they weren't in one room because they were covering many states in the United States. We were doing everything in Jakarta to cover Indonesia, which is the 4th largest country in the world in population terms. So it was a big deal. We were doing phenomenal work. We were covering Sumatra, we were covering lots of other parts of Java, and we were covering probably a third of the population in terms of footprint for PT Telkomsel, which was the biggest telecoms operator in Indonesia at that time. and I was responsible for that account. It was a $125 million account every year, so it was great experience. So that was a sort of a high point in terms of the personal impact on business, if you like. I have had many very deeply satisfying experiences on a much smaller scale in terms of helping business owners get their management team to something of a shape which allows them to have a life. And that's the other thing that I get great satisfaction out of. So sitting with fellas who are killing themselves in their businesses, typically putting in 70 hours a week, getting them back to having a life, and getting them back to having a life by having number 2s and number 3s and 4s in their business, carrying the strain and having a structure so that they could step back and have a life as well as having a business. And that gives me satisfaction. And that's what I do. That's what I'm happy to be doing the rest of my days. That plus working with businesses and doing strategic planning. But management teams, my management team in Indonesia that I had back 20 years ago, they're the guys who ran Ericsson Indonesia. Nobody's in a top job in Ericsson Indonesia for the last 20 years who didn't work for me. It's extraordinary, but I was just privileged and lucky enough to be in that position and learned a lot about creating management teams in that period of my career. And that's what I was looking to try and find a platform to come into Tab to do. And that's actually what I get the most satisfaction in my job in Tab doing. If that makes sense to you, John.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to push a button or two here now, Pat.
Sure.
Tell me about the hardest lesson you've learned in your business career to date.
Well, I've started a business with somebody and I had to shut it down, and that was a hard lesson. I put about 3 years into a startup, and I was doing this as a side project. And I don't want to go into the details of it because I don't want to say too much about other people working in the business, but it was 3 of us got together to do it, and I was a minority shareholder, and I had another guy who was a minority shareholder, and there was a guy with a 51% shareholder. And I thought I could hold the thing together with my own tools, like having a clear vision and having clear strategy and a clear idea. And I was doing great. We were doing fantastically well. We got backers. We had people willing to invest in us and all kinds of things. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with certain types of people, and I knew this from the guys I put together, all it takes is one guy to get outside the boundaries and you have an unstable situation. And I knew enough to know that once we had got to a certain point, the only way to deal with this is to shut it down, to protect my business and to protect the other guy's business, and time and everything else, just shut it down. So I took that decision. We took that decision to shut down the business, the junior partner, myself and himself. And we actually steered the other guy into shutting it down. I said, all right, go back, wind it all back to the beginning, and off you go. You can go on your own track if you want, not with us. That was a tough lesson, tough process, but a very, very good lesson. I feel now I have my entrepreneur's badge. I've put my money at risk and I've learned my lessons. I've gone through a lot in terms of seed funding. I've gone through a lot in terms of team establishment, in terms of founders and what to look for. It was a great insider experience. So it was a really good investment in my education as a business coach who might work with startups. And I generally don't work with startups for the simple reason that they can't afford me. I work with more established businesses because they're in a position to pay somebody like me. But I needed to understand that space, and it was part of what drew me into it in the first place. But it was painful actually shutting down a business and saying, right, this isn't going to work. That's painful. And it makes me much better at empathizing with people and empathizing with the range of emotions that business owners have to go through. Because when you're an employee, the worst thing that can happen to you is you lose your job overnight or something like that. And that can be really difficult. I could empathize with people who find themselves in those situations from my experience in the corporate world. Like I was fired 4 times in Ericsson. It was a laugh now. Every time they fired me, they keep rehiring. But it was an interesting experience when your contracts come up. It was that type of an experience that technically you could call it a firing. In reality, it was something quite different. And every one of these nodal points is a reinvention. And every one of those reinventions is an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to be a better person, a better business person, and a better leader. And that particular pain is most recent, But I've had lots of those moments where you say, my God, what am I going to do? And you're lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're not sure what you're going to do. Those are growth opportunities now, looked back on from where I am now. They didn't feel like that at the time. But what I would pipe up and say is a fellow like me talking in your ear as a business coach or doing a 90-minute monthly session helps to turn those crises into growing sessions. So that's another piece of promotion on my part for what I do, if you like. But I hope that answers your question.
It does indeed. And thank you for that lengthy answer. There was an article there in the RTE app yesterday that the government might be giving support to businesses in the SME sector post-COVID that will need restructuring. Do you see an opportunity for the TAB, the Alternative Board, in helping SMEs to restructure once COVID?
I think there's an opportunity to coach people to a certain point, if that's what they need. Haven't really had a chance to assess the legislation. Haven't really had an opportunity to drill into it. I think there are different circumstances for that legislation to be applied, and I suspect it'll be applied to some of the larger restructuring candidates. If you're in business and you're under 8 million euros in turnover, it's very difficult to sell that business. And it's very difficult to attract in the kind of corporate firepower of consulting skill sets, consulting level skill sets, to repackage or reframe that so that it can have new ownership and new capital. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's down to how the accounting works and its scale, but primarily it's about scale. Most SMEs in Ireland are actually, a lot of them, most in volume number terms, are running at turnover levels of less than 8 million. So for the vast majority of them, I suspect that this new legislation won't make a whole heap of difference. But for anything over that type of turnover, as it's sort of a notional threshold, I think it will. But I need to read the legislation and I need to bounce it around with other people as we understand it a little bit better. I think the key corporate restructuring challenge that most of the businesses I work with face are really either selling or transition to the next generation of ownership if it's a family business. Only 30% of businesses successfully transition from generation 1 to generation 2. And in terms of selling a business, the success rate for business owners who are heading into their 50s and 60s and even into their 70s, if they don't have a strategy in place, the success rate is not great, to be honest, in terms of recouping a lot of the money that they have tied up in the business. So those are the issues, and we look at the new legislation in the context of what it does for those types of scenarios to better understand it. We're hopeful that TAB, we have a lot of experience to bring to bear. We'd like to get involved via the government, maybe with some of the other entities, some of the more structured lobbying groups to come in and actually do services in that space. So we're very much open to that conversation if that should arise, because we have a lot to offer there.
What do you say to a person who's in your group down in the Midlands, who comes to you at a monthly meeting and says, Pat, I've had a terrible month. I'm working all the hours in the day. I've no one to delegate to. My order book is out the door. What do you say to that person?
Usually I arrive start with questions in terms of, well, what have you tried so far? It's a textbook sort of situation. So how are you dealing with this and how have you got on? What have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? What it usually I end up with is discovering that either in the past they've had somebody working with them who was doing a lot of the work and it's fallen back on them, or alternatively they struggle to let go and to delegate. Therefore, they haven't grown the people around them to their full potential of far growth so that they can make the life of the business owner easier. And it's an exploration exercise to see, well, what's out there? What do you already have around you in terms of the people who are working with you now? And what could they be doing? And what are the limits of their capabilities? And what strategies can the business owner use to fully utilize and fully stretch the capacity that he already or she already has? that's usually where I end up with in that kind of situation.
Presumably from those questions, the person gives you the answer that they need to hear and you need to hear yourself and help them to move forward. Rather than you giving them the answer, they come up with the answer themselves nearly by you asking the pertinent questions.
That's what a business coach should do. A consultant is a person who gives you the pertinent answers. A business coach is a person who helps to explore that.
Yeah.
And the difference, I guess, is that the consultant defines the boundaries of the problem and then provides the best solution for a problem that fits within those boundaries. Usually what I find with business owners is that their lives are very, very messy, particularly in small businesses, not their personal lives, but their business lives, and the draws and demands on their time. It takes a long time to define the problem properly. And frequently, the obvious solution for a consultant isn't necessarily the right solution. So it takes time for the solution to emerge. And I often find that what I thought was the obvious solution isn't the right solution, because there's stuff that the business owner hasn't necessarily even consciously verbalized ever before. But when he finds himself or she finds themselves consciously verbalizing that stuff, then suddenly it transforms the understanding of the problem and the solution becomes obvious. So maybe hiring somebody isn't the right answer because the person who's already doing the job is grossly underutilized. And the obvious answer isn't actually to find a new person, it's just to get Mary, who's sitting in the corner and doesn't shine in the business, to just step up and show her full potential, or some version of that.
I'm just saying there, so take 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings with the business owner for the actual problem or issue at hand to be clearly verbalized. And therefore, when that happens, the answer is staring that person in the face. But it takes time for them to feel comfortable in verbalizing what the actual issue is. All too often they might skirt around it initially. Is that what you're saying there, Pat?
I'd like to be making a bit more quick progress than that, actually, to be frank. As a practitioner, I'd be looking to get to the bottom of things in a session rather than waiting for 3 or 4 sessions.
Yeah.
Nobody has time to wait for that long to solve a problem like this. People need it solved now. And I'm happy to take a phone call occasionally from people who are in a bit of trouble. For my regulars, I get phone calls occasionally and say, look, Pat, what do you think of this? The classic one is such and such is thinking of has an offer on the table. What am I going to do? And there could be all kinds of offers on the table. It could be to buy the business. It could be somebody wants to sell somebody the business. It could be anything. And I'd be one of the first people I'd be contacted by in those situations to say, right, what's the right thing to do here? What do we do? And I'd get stuck into that type of conversation. And I'd have enough of experience to hopefully help that person to explore the right options and the right choices and the right people to actually turn to for help in terms of professional help. The accountant is very important in those types of conversations, for example, or you might need help from a HR specialist, for example, in other types of situations.
Going back to Pat Duffy, what does the future hold for Pat Duffy?
I've had a very good COVID year, and I'm very optimistic about the future of the coaching business that I have. Future holds boards, for peer boards. We do something called StratPro, which is strategic planning for larger companies and the management teams of larger companies. I'm working with that, which is a different type of engagement, and it involves working with more established management teams. I'm looking at potentially bringing people into the business in terms of working with me, which is framing up for 2022. And probably looking at my profile, I start out by trying to make a network with people and get known and get a trusted network of people. I then need to look at how we are actually marketing the brand and pushing promoting the brand. One of the things we're doing is we're doing First Fridays on a monthly basis at TAB at the national level. So TAB consists of a number of different franchises across Cork, Dublin and the Midlands. And we're inviting people to attend First Fridays at 10 a.m. It's just an hour. and it's an opportunity to get a sense of the kinds of business owners that we engage with, and there's an opportunity to get a sense of what's going on out there, and it's a little bit of networking as well. But it's just a forum that we have running on a first Friday, and that's my offering to you, John, and to anybody who's in this. If you're interested in getting a slightly more flavour of what we do, there's no obligation. There's absolutely no cost. It just gives you an opportunity to take an hour out and actually have a look and see what's going on in business from the perspective of people looking strategically at working on their business, rather than like BNI in terms of trying to work in the business and generate more referrals and more leads. This is stepping back a little bit and looking a little bit more strategic at business. So
how does a person join the First Friday program?
We're looking for business owners, and we're looking for people typically, just as a simple benchmark, 10 employees and up in that space, who would be just looking for a sense of direction. There's a heck of a lot of uncertainty about what the next 3 years is going to look like. There's huge growth. I mean, this morning I was working with somebody who has far more demand than he has capacity to deliver to, and that's not uncommon for a lot of businesses. And how do they transition to the new reality of post-COVID world? Ireland is a beneficiary of all of these changes because we had laid at a national level some very good strategic thinking and good strategic plans. We're a lot of industries are doing really, really well, notwithstanding the meltdown that the travel industry and the tourism industry is experiencing, and the restaurant industry and the pub industry. Notwithstanding those disasters that they've had to experience as a segment in the economy, taking the overall end-to-end economy as a total end-to-end piece, there are a lot of small and medium-sized business owners who are barely keeping up with demand and barely keeping up with the level of change that they need. The wage support schemes particularly have left them not vulnerable to cash flow in the short term. What the next 18 to 36 months will look like, however, in terms of how government support will merge with the reality of some of these businesses, that's not so clear. There's been a lot of cheap SBCI type capital coming available to businesses, which many of the people I've worked with have tapped into. And that's going to make a difference. And that's, it's a case of where are we going to land it and what's the vision that they're working toward. While you can have a vision for what the world looks like today, the world has changed so fast that people are constantly keeping in mind where are the general trends. So for example, in construction, cost of materials has gone through the roof. Very difficult to find labor. Most construction businesses are struggling to find the people they need to fulfill their mission. Most of them are struggling with cost of materials going up at rates that are faster than they can cope with. Those two dynamics need to wash out into that space, for example. And there's similar types of challenges in front of other businesses.
Saw an article there in the paper at the weekend where a man who's building his own one-off house, his prices have increased. The cost to him, I should say, of building the house has increased 30% this year because there's a shortage of blocks, cement, and other building materials. There's more demand than there's supply, and consequently, prices have increased by nearly 1/3. It's quite interesting, that is, and the whole dynamic of inflation might rear its head again in the very near future. There was an article there in the Sunday Times also, in the business section, that the American economy is booming again, post-COVID nearly. There's huge demand for new cars, new houses are being sold, a lot of demand out there. And they reckon that because there's excess demand over supply for materials, that you're going to see inflation reappearing, and it's going to force the Fed, the Federal Reserve, to increase the cost of lending in the US. So it's all interesting out there to see what dynamics are going to play out over the next couple of years post-COVID. Tell me, how can the audience contact Pat Duffy?
Well, first of all, you can search me on the web. You'll find me, Pat Duffy, the Alternative Board, on LinkedIn. And you can, I'm sure you can provide contact details at the end of this in terms of my email address and my mobile phone number. I'd like to think I'm contactable and reach outable too. And I'm not networking like I used to. I'm just too busy. And I'm conserving my energies so that I actually work with my customers and my businesses, which is a nice way to be. And I'm at that stage now where I'm looking at bringing other people into the business so that I get the balance right, which is fortunate. And I'm grateful to be at that point after 4 years in the business. But I should be reachable on LinkedIn, and I should be reachable if you put some of these search keywords in terms of the Alternative Board Midlands or the Alternative Board Pat Duffy, you'll find me straight away.
And just to reiterate, should people contact you directly if they want to join the First Fridays program?
Absolutely, just get directly in contact with me, and we'll schedule you in. You get an invite from one of our backroom staff, and we'll get you set up with that. There'll be a link on an email if you come to a Zoom call, and that's it. You just turn up. So, and there's no obligation. I'm not going to. We used to have sit-down meetings, and we used to talk to people and have coffee schedules. Now we run sample board meetings, so people get a sense of what a board meeting feels like. And I take my time with people. I don't push people. If it's for them, it's for them. If it's not, it's not. And I work with them. I have a point in time where I said, right, we're going to go commercial from here on in, and these are my terms, and I have a term sheet, and I have a coaching fee, and I have a board fee, and I have a strap pro fee, which and various fees for the services I do. I also do psychometric assessments for staff, so they come in at around €300 assessments, which is a 42-page report combined with a typically 45-minute coaching session for the individual employee in the business. Obviously, the business owner will get one of those as part of their onboarding package. And when you come on board as a business owner, you get a full software platform called the Business Builder's Blueprint, which I have the video on that, and it can explain what it is, but essentially it's a working environment for business coaches and for business coachees to spell out their vision, their strengths and weaknesses, the value proposition, and their business plans. And it gives me an opportunity for them, particularly on a 12-monthly cycle, to actually lay the groundwork for what they're going to achieve on a 12-month basis as we go through their coaching cycle.
I'd like to thank Pat Duffy for sharing his life experience and business experience with us.